Good afternoon, directors, staff, members of the public listening. I'll now call this February 16th, 2021 Finance Committee meeting to order. Due to the current federal and state emergency declarations, this meeting is being conducted by electronic means in accordance with Minnesota Statute 13D-021. This meeting is being live streamed on our website and a recording will be posted there as well. This meeting will also run on Channel 15. Before we begin, I'll remind everyone of a few virtual meeting requirements and tips. We will take all votes by roll call. I'll ask Ryan to serve as our clerk today and call the roll when needed. Committee members and staff, please mute yourselves when you're not talking to avoid background noise. Remember to speak clearly, slowly, and into your microphones. Directors, use the raise your hand feature to be recognized. Thank you. Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Director El-Amin. Director Inns.
Here.
Director Jourdain.
Here.
Director Ellison.
Here.
Chair Caprini.
Present. Thank you. I will also note that Director El-Amin, who is on our board's representative on the City North Neighborhood Revitalization Policy Board. She's attending their first meeting this evening. Their schedule is currently a conflict with our meeting, so she's asking them to consider a different schedule. I'll now take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second with the last name for the record?
Second, Ellison.
The agenda has been moved and seconded. If there's any discussion, please raise your hand to be recognized. Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Inns.
Here. Yes.
Jourdain.
Yes.
Ellison.
Aye.
Caprini.
Aye. Thank you. That motion carries and we have an approved agenda. Next is the approval of the minutes from the January 19th, 2021 meeting. Can I please get a motion to approve as presented? Is there a second?
Second, Ellison.
The minutes from January 19th have been moved and seconded. If there's any discussion, please raise your hand to be recognized. Ryan, will you please call the roll?
Inns.
Yes.
Jourdain.
Yes.
Ellison.
Aye.
Caprini.
Aye. Thank you. That motion carries and the minutes are approved. Our first report on school and department budget allocations. Superintendent, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Caprini. I'd like to just take a few minutes to just share some background information. So good evening, board directors. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to give you kind of an overview. As you're well aware, tonight we're bringing to the board the first iteration of our proposed budget for the fiscal 2021-22 school year. We presented the pro forma related to this budget at the end of the 2020 calendar year. And due to our ongoing pandemic, as well as the shifting of our enrollment, our financial picture has continued to evolve. So my hope this evening is that you will see our intentional effort to honor our commitments related to implementing the comprehensive district design, to expanding our literacy efforts across the district, and to equitably enhancing learning opportunities throughout the district. In particular, you'll see that we've used the elementary secondary school emergency relief dollars, also known as ESSER. We've used those revenue to close a projected gap rather than taking deep cuts from our schools and departments. So I think that's the first thing that you'll be able to see in this budget proposal. This was a very important step to helping us maintain stability and continuing our program continuity. Similarly, we're making a multi-million-dollar investment to stave off the effects of learning loss, K-12, which we've talked about since this pandemic. And I'm also very excited that this budget will allow us to fully transition from a 3-to-1 technology district to a more universal technology district. And again, that's to define that students who actually, where it's appropriate, will have access to digital devices. If this budget is ultimately approved by the board, we'll have made that monumental shift of this transition from to universal technology across the district in just 18 months, which routinely will take districts several years to accomplish, but we see the need and the benefit of that happening. You'll also notice that we've recommended several areas of interest for the elementary, secondary school emergency relief funds. I want to point out that due to the constraints regarding compliance reporting, many of those investments will show up in our central office budget. But I want to be clear that most of these positions, materials, et cetera, are going to be allocated to support schools directly. And I know that our budget director, Tammy Fredrickson, will be speaking to that this evening as well. That includes investments like advanced academics, world languages at the middle grades, science curriculum adoption, and professional development for teachers to move forward with our curriculum transformation work. I also want to acknowledge that, just to be clear to everyone, this year's budget process or the budgeting process was quite complex because, as I said, we had to factor in not only the pandemic, but the additional revenue that we're seeing changes to, especially around this grant that's being provided to us. And I want to thank Senior Officer Giap and members of the finance team, as well as our senior leaders, for digging in over multiple meetings to develop a plan that keeps the learning needs of all of our students at the forefront. And of course, using the values document as a guide and staying the course with our 4 core priorities, I believe you'll see a budget that acknowledges both the fiscal realities we have, as well as recognizing that our students are facing significant challenges after a year of distance learning, and they'll need additional supports to ensure their success. So with that, Chair Caprini, I will turn it over to Senior Officer Giap and the finance team to provide the next part of this presentation this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent Graff. Thank you, Chair Caprini, Chair, Board Chair Ellison, and members of the committee and of the board. As the superintendent said, this has been a very lengthy process, not only lengthy horizontally, but vertically, going deep to making sure that we use ESSA the right way, given the small, I mean, not the small, but the limited information that we received so far. And so with that, I'll let Tammy Fredrickson, the Director of the Budget Office, to go through the presentation, and then we'll answer any questions that you will have on the presentation. Thank you very much. Tammy, you can take it from there.
Thank you, Senior Leader Giap, Superintendent, Chair Caprini, members of the board, public viewing this. We have had, as you can imagine, quite a challenge to put this budget together, and there's still a lot of uncertainty as we move forward into the next year. So we have tried to build this budget to be as flexible as we can as things change and we get more information as the year progresses. Next slide. We've seen a significant decline in enrollment this current year due to the pandemic. And as we plan for next year, we had to make some assumptions about what our enrollment will look like. We anticipated the historical decline in enrollment that we've been seeing over the last several years, and then taking into account the number of students that we lost this year for the pandemic, and assuming that we're going to get a good majority of them back, we're anticipating a decline of about 1,329 students, which is going to result in decreased enrollment or revenue for us. The funding gap that we had recognized in the pro forma document this last fall, we're going to use the ESSER II grant dollars to offset the essentially funding gap that we're recognizing. The comprehensive district design implementation plan that the board approved already is included in this budget proposal. So everything that was already approved, we've accounted for in this budget. And we're still projecting the end of this current year, we will end with an unassigned fund balance of 8.1%, which is within our board policy. Next slide. The assumptions that we're making as we look at our expense projections, we are assuming that departments will have their budgets included an inflationary cost increase. And then as we looked at the school allocations, we're basing them on the changes in enrollment, the requirements that we have set in the predictable staffing model, plus all of that categorical funding that we give to schools in a quote normal year, such as compensatory dollars, referendum, QComp, integration aid, and title dollars that will continue to flow to the schools. Included in this budget is the new investments that senior leaders in the team have identified, and also the comprehensive district design that's already been approved. So we're using the ESSER II dollars also to address learning loss that our students are experiencing this year, as well as ensuring that we'll have universal access for all students next year. Next slide. So the revenue that we're anticipating receiving is the state aid, the levy, and all the other kind of routine funding that we get every year. And then also the ESSER II dollars that we're using to offset some of those expenses. I can note this is a legislative funding year. So any increases that we'll get from the legislature are not taken into account for this budget. If we do get some dollars on the Gen Ed formula, then that will be additional revenue that will come to the board with a budget amendment for. Next slide. As I say, there are many factors that have questions around as we put this budget together. So what we plan to do is put aside money in the different funds, such as general fund, title, compensatory aid, referendum, and the mental health dollars. We're going to set those aside, and then as we actually find out where the students will be attending this fall, and we'll have a better idea of what the schools look like, then we can distribute those dollars where they're really needed. Next slide. So some of the impacts that we'll see in this budget proposal in front of you is that we're increasing the career and tech ed allocations by 4.2 full-time equivalencies. So we're adding some positions at different high schools. We also added a world language allocation to all the middle schools. We've increased the advanced academic positions. We've added support to Heritage, Wellstone, and North High as part of the CDD implementation. We've also significantly increased the support that we're going to be providing magnet schools as part of the CDD implementation. But that's going to be offset with some reductions at the schools. So an enrollment decline of 1,329 students is the equivalent of 54 classroom teaching positions. We've also recalculated our salary average. It's going to be reduced for next year by $1,296, which is about 2.25%, partly because there was 66 teachers who took advantage of the early retirement incentive bonus. We have fewer of the more tenured teachers. And also this year, as we looked at all of the teacher positions, we've noticed a historical vacancy rate of about 4%, which means that those positions typically through the year are not filled. So we decided to account for those specifically in our salary average. for those vacant positions, and that helped reduce the teacher salary average, which actually ended up saving us some dollars. We also have 1,400 fewer students who are receiving free and reduced lunch, or that were reported as having receiving free and reduced lunch, which is about a 2.3% decrease. And that results directly in reduced compensatory aid and Title I dollars going to the schools. We've also see a decline of about 479 English learning students, which resulted in about 18 fewer English as a second language teacher allocations out to the schools. We're also realigning how we're giving resources to the racially isolated schools. As we reconfigure the schools for the comprehensive district design, we're anticipating having fewer racially isolated schools. So we repurpose those dollars mostly towards the magnet schools. There's fewer approved grants. That could change as organizations are kind of finalizing their budgets for next year. They're able to identify some of the dollars that they can send our way through grants. But right now it's down about $3.5 million from what we currently have this year. And then there's a change in the legislation around voluntary pre-kindergarten. They had an increase over the last year, which expired. So we're seeing a reduction of about $600,000 for the voluntary pre-kindergarten, although it is on the legislative agenda. And if we do get those dollars back, then those will go towards the schools that we've had to reduce the voluntary pre-K for. Next slide. So when we did the pro forma, we were assuming that our revenue would be about $573.9 million, which you'll see in the second column, fiscal year 22, which was going to be a $26 million reduction. So we were looking at a gap that we were going to have to fill. Since then, we got the ESSER $2 and have determined that we'll use $59.5 million of those ESSER $2 to supplement our base revenue for a total of $633.4 million. And then for our expenses, all of those things that we just talked about on the previous slide, reductions at revenue for schools will result in schools going from $369.4 million to $348.4 million, mostly around the teacher salaries and the enrollment reductions. And then departments, they have $1.7 million reduction. And then we've added the $13.5 million for the comprehensive district design that the board has already approved. We have new investments, which we'll get to in a later slide, about $13.5 million. And then we also have additional IT investments. That $9 million is for the universal access, make sure that we have that. And then we also have $8 million that we've identified as covering costs related to the learning loss for our students that they're experiencing this year. Next slide. So as we talked about the schools allocations going from 369 million to 348, we wanted to try to make it very clear where the reductions and the increases are coming from to result in the allocation that will go to schools. And as you can see, the biggest reduction in allocations going directly to schools is that average salary and our declining enrollment, and then the lower free and reduced lunch counts. So we've tried to offset that with some additional support that's going to be going to schools. Next slide. So as we talked about, the original budget that we talked about in the pro forma was $573.9 million. And we've broken this slide down by the different funding categories. So the general fund, the special ed dollars, our compensatory, the title and grants, which includes the ESSER II dollars, and then funded programs, which are things like athletic fees that we have for the different sites. So the total revenue, as we talked about in the first slide, is 633.4 million. And then we've broken down the different funding sources by schools and departments. We have the comprehensive district design, 12 million in general fund, which is what the board approved. And then we've also identified $1.5 million that we can take from the ESSER II dollars. And then the new investments, the 13.3, I'll show in just a moment. And then that 9 million IT investment, which is a new investment for universal access and the learning loss. So if we take the total revenue minus the total expenses, we're looking at ending this 22 or 21-22 school year with taking 600,000 out of fund balance. I should note here that the ESSER II dollars, they are actually, we're allowed to spend them through the 23 school year. And some of the new investments that we've talked about are kind of 2-year investments. So we didn't want to spend the entire amount of ESSER II money in this year because some of these investments have, we call tails to them, that they will still be needing resources in year 2. And so we've set aside about 18 million of the ESSER II money to cover those new investments that will slide into year 2 for 22-23. So next slide. I know this is really small, but this is the list of the $13.3 million investments. And as the superintendent had mentioned, there are many of these investments that for compliance and uncertainty at some of the schools right now, we're giving allocations to departments, and then they will, once we know where the students are going to be, we'll use those dollars to support the schools. One of those is for example, the $1.5 million under the associates for mental health. That money will begin in the special ed department, and then as we see where the true mental health needs are, then we can allocate either a school nurse or psychologist or social worker, counselor, whatever the needs may be. Once we've identified them, can go out to the schools. But we didn't want to just give it out yet, because again, we are not 100% sure where the students are going to land come this fall. So there's 2 pages of recommended investments. Again, many of these are going to be at school levels once we see where the kids are. And that is what I have. We'll certainly take any questions.
Thank you, Director Friedrichsen. Directors, do you have any comments or questions? Ryan, can you hear me?
Yep. Director Inns has his hand raised. Director.
Okay, I'm actually looking at the proposal. I can't see. Oh, there it is. Director Enns, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Caprini. I have a couple of questions. First, I want to say thanks for this budget presentation. I really appreciate the concise sort of major points. A few things I just have a question about that I'd like to see as we move forward. I thought it was pretty interesting. There was the slide about where some of the additional investments are going as a result of the CDD. So the magnet schools, for instance, the world languages teachers at the magnet schools, things like that. I'm wondering about the community schools a little bit, and how we see differing programmatic investment at the community schools, neighborhood schools, as a result of the CDD. One of the things we had talked about is we wanted to make sure that we provided that well-rounded education for kids at every school in every neighborhood. And so, some of the things we talked about have been, with regard to the predictable staffing, for instance, the fifth grade musical instruments, right? How does that compare to previous investment with regard to the arts, for instance, at those community schools? If there's some way we could see that, like how the CDD is impacting community schools through the budget as well. So I'd like to see some of that information. The free and reduced lunch thing, I know that we had a huge push to try and get accurate reporting of data around that in distance learning. Looks like, maybe we didn't get what we would hope for. So I'd like to see a comparison to previous years. I'm sure you have that so that you know what to expect maybe next year, and to what extent we're going to be able to recapture some of that revenue in the years that move ahead. I'd like to know a little bit more about that as well. So those are a couple of questions that I have. I don't want to take up everybody's time with my questions.
Superintendent, or would you like to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Caprini. Director
To the
Hans,
extent that you could answer it now, and then going
Yeah.
forward, how you might be able to answer it more.
Yeah, I kind of took that as an opportunity for us to maybe come back and share specifically more details around the all those areas specific to the community schools and what benefits will be provided to them as we develop a well-rounded education. You did touch on two things, obviously, the predictable staffing, the music for our students in fifth grade. And I do have that recollection of that list we created on what we would be offering. And those items were developed into our portion of the budget that says CDC implementation. So we don't have that broken down here for you today, but I can certainly pull that together and make sure that we highlight that. But those were two examples that you mentioned specifically. And I know that what we're doing around our curriculum transformation and our science, technology, engineering, mathematics for all is part of that. And as far as the free and reduced lunch, yes, we can get those numbers and show the transition that we've had over the last couple of years, so how those numbers continue to decline in our district. And I know that having this conversation with associates today, there are a number of schools that did make a concerted effort. And I know we've talked about this as well, the different ways that we've communicated and asked for families to ensure that they're filling out the educational benefit forms, even if they don't think they qualify, just as a way to have a better understanding. I know that that has been a huge push for many of our schools. And so I don't want to give the impression that they're not doing their work or that we're not communicating with it. I think there's some speculation as to what's going on with that. And a good part of it is, the changing of willingness for families or people to even complete those documents. Even as they do with the school request, there's still a number of families that are not as receptive to completing those forms. But we can get the numbers from where we were last year to this year and look at kind of anticipating what that will look like going forward. But I will say, from my experience in talking with other large districts across the nation through the Council of Great City Schools, they're seeing that trend as well. More and more difficult to get those numbers at the level that they've had in the past. And again, some speculation behind that, but we'll pull those numbers together for the board.
I think that form, as somebody, who has kids in the district, and it was, sometimes I don't fill out my forms right away. it definitely feels a lot different. The ask feels a lot different in distance learning than it does when you're at the school. And so I wouldn't have expected that big of a decline, but I think that that has a lot to do with it. That's just my speculation anecdotally, but
Yeah, we've even taken the approach where we've been given permission to work directly with the parents to assist with the completion of that form. So we've tried to look at alternative measures while making sure that we're still in compliance and meeting the strict guidelines that come from the federal direction around how they complete those free and reduced lunch forms. But I think that was part of the conversation with my colleagues across the nation, is that it is more difficult. It's just not the routine of having a paper right there in front of you or being able to complete it online. It's more challenging. So definitely hear that concern.
Thank you, Superintendent and Director Enns, for those questions. Director Ellison, Chair Ellison.
Yes, thank you, Chair Caprini. How does that decrease show up in our schools? What looks different in our schools without that funding? The compensatory and the Title I funding that decrease in the free and reduced lunch forms.
So Chair Ellison, Chair Caprini, there are a couple ways that it looks differently. I think it largely depends on what the title application is for schools, what they have for their Title I plan. Each school who receives Title I dollars has to have a plan and how they implement the utilization of those dollars. So it could be professional development. It could be, in some cases, staffing. And so with that reduction, getting this information now, they'll have to go through their whole budget review and start to identify what will the trade-offs be, especially as we're going to be going into interview and select. So they want to make sure that they are processing their staffing allocations clearly and carefully. As far as the compensatory dollars, it's again part of the same. There is a clear approach to how they utilize those dollars. So the plan that they've had in place for the last couple of years, if there's a substantial decline in either their title dollars or their compensatory dollars, they would then have to revise that plan. And as mentioned earlier, with the changing boundaries and demographics, we'll see a greater shift of those resources. And so anticipating that while some may see a reduction at their school in terms of the money, they are probably also seeing a shift of the demographic and population. So the needs of the students by this formula will change as well. So I would anticipate it will be both a staffing kind of consideration that they will have to look at, depending on how they use those dollars with their title and their compensatory, as well as the I will say professional development or additional kind of supportive materials that they might have put in place in their plans.
Okay, thank you. So as a parent, if I see a change in my child's school, is the principal the best person to help me understand what's going on?
Yes, and I think to that point, as I know Director Enns has brought this up, as well as other board directors, our process is to take what we have from the board priorities, take that budget tie-out document that was shared. It was quite extensive, and it gave clarification around the priorities that we have, not only for the board, but what the core priorities are of the district, and then making sure that through those school-based conversations, whether it's site council or just communication from the school leader, explaining transparently what their financial current state is and what the projections are for next year. But the building principal would be the best point of contact for, understanding how that is going to affect their school based on the current projections.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Caprini.
Thank you, Chair Ellison and Superintendent. I guess these have been some great questions. Director Enns actually asked a few of the questions that I was interested in getting information about, so I appreciate that. But I will make just a couple of comments. I appreciate the fact that the finance team has has spread the money out, the money from ESSER over the next few school years, 22, 23, 24, just to make sure that we have a safety net. That's something that I believe, did I hear that correctly? That some of those dollars were going to be saved for those school years?
Yeah, Chair Caprini, what you heard was that some of the resources that we're putting forward right now as a recommendation or as part of this budget will have a need to be financed next year. And so rather than using all the dollars this year, we
Right.
recognize we're going to need that next year. So anything that continues on, or at least is needed as a support for next year, is considered.
Right, that's exactly what I was talking about. I do recall Director Frederickson mentioning the school year 23, 24, so I wasn't sure if that was a part of those funds that are being, because we could still use those dollars for the very same reason we're using them now, and they can't be used for anything else, correct?
Correct, Director Caprini or Chair Caprini. The ESSER are for 2 years, 21, 22, and then 22, 23. So
Okay.
part of the initiatives that we would be using to counter learning loss, for instance, may extend over 2 years. So the first part of that is in the 22 allocation, and the second part of it would be in the 22, 23 allocation. The same thing goes with IT, for instance. There are some IT investments that we suggested that would take place in 22, the first part of it, and the remainder would go into 2023, 22, 23.
Perfect. And then my last comment is I also appreciate the allocation for middle school language. And then I guess I did have one last question. On one of the slides, I think it might have been slide number 11, I was trying to line up where the instruments for, I think it was elementary, 5th grade, what that number was. And I wasn't sure if it was $0 or $35,000. I tried to line it up. If we could just go back to that quick. Or we can talk about it tomorrow, Senior Officer Giap.
Maybe while we're getting to the slide, I could follow back up with what the question was from Director Enns around just some of the benefit. We did talk about the music and the predictable staffing a little bit, but there's also a greater focus on literacy and math. And so I think the investment in our professional development is going to be there for our community schools, as well as we talked a little bit already this past year recently about the STEM for all in grades K through 8, musical instruments grade 5, advanced academics as well, K-8, and the ethnic studies as a graduation requirement, the mental health supports. So all of those things, kind of generally speaking to what are, but we'll certainly pull more out of there specifically for that question that Chair Enns or Director Enns had. So I'll turn it over to Director Frederickson and see if she wants to speak to that line item question.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. As we looked at this current year's budget, there were some things that we had put into the 2021 budget that actually are not going to happen. So we were able to actually put in the order for the musical instruments out of this year's budget, so we won't have to take it out of next year.
Okay,
So
I do recall that.
Yeah, so they will be there, but we wanted to do as much as we can this year, just because we know next year is going to be a big challenge. So we were able to get the order in this year.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Directors, if there's no other questions, I'd like to move on to the next presentation. The proposed budget for achievement, integration, and as well as federal title dollars. So Superintendent Graff.
I just have another question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm wondering, maybe I missed this. about the school safety, so the SROs and the removal of the SROs. And I know that the cost of that was partially paid by the city. So I'm wondering how our current security plan or school safety officers, how that compares to previous years in terms of the budgetary impact.
So
Seeing,
Director Inns, we use the dollar amount from the SRO contract, and they've hired security managers essentially in that office. So you'll see on the new investments that one of the things that we're adding to the new investments is the small additional cost that it's going to be for those additional staff. So we've got those covered in the next year's budget.
So I guess I'm wondering, like, if the SROs cost us 1.6 million, for example, right? And then the city paid, let's just say, I mean, I don't know what the number is, but say the city paid 2 million, right? So the overall cost was like 3.6, but we only paid 1.6. What's our current security situation or school safety situation, and how much does it cost us? Is it 1.6 then, or, just for?
Yeah, that's what we've got built into the budget is our portion, and then plus the difference in the salary for those new positions that were hired.
you're muted. You're muted now, Director
Is it
Nelson.
more than overall, or is it the same?
It's almost the same. I mean, there's a slight increase as the positions that were hired were managers. But again, it's included in that new investment line. You'll see EMSS. That's the difference.
That's the additional amount compared to what it was previously. Okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you. So are we ready to move on to achievement and integration with Senior Officer Moore? And if so, let's do it.
Thanks, Chair Caprini. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Senior Officer Moore to walk through the achievement integration and title budgets. There's a whole host of title dollars there. So Senior Officer Moore, it's all yours.
All right. Hey, good evening, members of the board, Chair Ellison. Good to be here. So it's my pleasure to present high-level achievement integration as well as the title 1, 2, 3, 4 AYP budgets tonight. You have I believe you'll receive the actual allocations. What I wanted to do was just share with you some minor changes to the budget as we move forward for next year. Just quickly, as a reminder, the achievement integration goal areas is 3 goals for integration: increase racial and economic integration, reduce academic disparities, and increase access to effective and diverse teachers. Next slide. There are, in terms of metrics, the achievement integration budget is actually aligned to the world's best workforce. And so when we look at to what extent is the integration budget effective, we look at kindergarten readiness. We look at 3rd grade reading, which is actually up. Achievement gap close, still need to do significant work there. Ready for a career in college, that's identified as access to advanced courses. And the last is graduation rates, which we've also seen increases. The strategies are listed below. And so you see that we can focus on career and college readiness, innovative and integrated learning environments, family engagement, recruitment and retention of diverse staff of color, admin, professional development, and again, the equitable access to effective and diverse teachers. So this is by state statute, the integration plan. And so just included language for your own informational purposes as well as the public. But essentially, the primary purpose is to close the academic achievement gaps to promote economic and racial integration. And the statute, Part A, indicates that we want to pursue racial and economic integration. We want to increase achievement, equitable educational opportunities, and reduce academic disparities. So again, the state statute is really clear on the purpose of this revenue. So what it can fund, the primary idea is that these dollars are aligned to our 3-year achievement and integration plan. And so again, when we presented last year, the idea was that we would identify a set of programs and strategies. We would implement those strategies with fidelity to get to the outcomes that we've identified in the world's best workforce. But this slide just clearly identifies what it can fund, what it cannot fund. A key point at the bottom, when we look at our integration budget, 80% should go to direct student services. No more than 20% should go towards professional development, and then no more than 10% is identified for admin costs. And so that's something that we look very closely. In terms of what it cannot fund, there's often some confusion here, but it cannot fund programs directly for English language learners or special education. It can't supplant, so existing funding may not be used to replace funding for existing programs. It may not be used for programs that are identified as segregated. And so the state defines that as an activity or program identified for one particular group of students, either racial or economic. So while we're a strong supporter, for example, of Office of Black Male Achievement programming, that was moved off of the integration budget and funded by Fund 1 because, for example, it did not meet the guideline, similar to some of the activities in our Indian education program. Staffing, any staffing costs should be aligned directly to achieving and integration strategies, and then technology. It can't pay for ongoing technology costs, so there's a fund identified for that as well. So as Tammy mentioned, there's a per pupil allocation in our district for the integration revenue. And so we saw a decrease in our allocation due to enrollment declines, roughly $600,000. And so what we did is we did a 4% reduction in programming. We decreased our inter-district partnership. So that's a partnership with a neighboring district by about $30,000. And I wanted to highlight the last bullet. We did increase our magnet school allocation. That is the movement of dollars from transportation allocations to programming for our magnet schools. If you recall, we'd roughly spent $4.6 million last year for magnet school transportation. That is now approximately $1 million, with the remainder going towards programming for magnet schools. So that's the integration budget. And again, minor changes because we did approve a 3-year plan. The major reductions, again, are due to decline in enrollment. So Title I. So our Title I, again, this is the purpose. We're very aware of Title I, but to provide our children significant opportunity for fair, equitable, and high-quality education. Again, to close educational achievement gaps, and identified Title I by the percentage of students in our district qualified for free use lunch. We have a 40% threshold for Title I, so any school with 40% or more free use lunch qualifies for a school-wide Title I program. Interesting enough, the recommendations from our federal government, typically the average, they recommend an average Title I allocation of about your average free and reduced lunch population. So in our case, our district, I think we're roughly 64%. So that would be or 50%. So that would be roughly the Title I allocation the federal government would recommend. We choose to do 40%. That is a district's discretion for Title I school-wide. But generally, the federal government recommends Title I allocation of about your average free and reduced lunch population. We also provide an allocation of 70% or above. We call it a concentration allocation. We provide an additional dollar amount to our schools that are 70% or above free and reduced lunch for Title I. We do that because we also want to acknowledge some of the challenges of having concentrations of free and reduced lunch. So schools that are 70% or above free and reduced lunch received an additional allocation of Title I. So what it can fund, obviously school-wide programs to increase academic achievement, family engagement, and then we want our Title I dollars to be aligned to our school improvement plan. So I think Director Enns and others was mentioned, how do we know these dollars are aligned to what they're intended for? Well, the best way to look for our Title I is in our school improvement plans. So our school improvement plans identify needs through a comprehensive needs assessment, and then we align Title I dollars to those identified needs in the school. And so you see to the right what it cannot fund, and they're pretty clear on those items. So again, minor changes. Again, we have a decrease in our award due to enrollment declines in our free and reduced lunch population. That was roughly $2 million. We had some carry forward. So actually we made the decision to, particularly in a transition year with our comprehensive district design, 21-22, that we did not decrease the per pupil allocations to our schools. But again, any changes in Title I that schools should see will be based on their student populations or the percentage of students that are free and reduced lunch. But we did cover the difference, the decrease with carry forward dollars. So what we will see though is some decrease in department allocations and non-public. We also did a one-time increase last year to address our COVID challenges, parent communication. So we put some additional dollars for translations, family involvement, but this budget is moving back to family engagement set aside from 3% to 1%. And again, as I mentioned, we maintain our PPU, so per pupil units for schools 40%. We're continuing to do an additional allocation for schools 70% or above. This budget also in alignment with our comprehensive district design and priorities. We've identified additional dollars for a Key to Literacy initiative. So roughly additional $600,000 will go towards K2 literacy. We're also did an increased allocation for our parent participatory evaluation work. Our 15 schools with the highest populations of free and reduced lunch will have their site-based parent evaluation. We did a pilot this year at Hall and Hmong International Academy, saw some positive results. So our 15 schools with the highest population of free and reduced lunch will have a site-based parent evaluation, supporting a climate framework. We've also increased our allocation for High Five. So we have additional High Five locations, roughly $800,000 increase for early childhood. Again, that's a priority. And then we did set aside some dollars for enrollment changes. So as Tammy mentioned, we're anticipating some enrollment changes, boundary changes, and so our free and reduced lunch populations may vary by school. We're doing our best to project, but if we find that schools are underfunded or there needs to be an additional increase based upon changes in population, we did set aside some Title I dollars to address any unmet needs. So Title II, again, the purpose of Title II is again, increase student achievement. So you see that ongoing theme. But it's also to focus on increased academic achievement, really through the improving the quality and effectiveness of teachers and our principals and our school leaders. So the best way often to think about Title II is this is professional development dollars for teachers, for principals. We're trying to increase the number of effective teachers, support our teachers in gaining the necessary knowledge and skills, and supporting our students. And so again, you see number 4, greater access to effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders. So primary purpose is really to support increase in knowledge, core knowledge that our teachers need, our principals need to support academic achievement. So again, you see what it can fund. So as I mentioned, professional learning, induction and mentorship, you're going to see an addition of a program to support students with special needs, a training program. meaningful evaluation support, so evaluation systems for our principals as well as our teachers, teacher leadership, also transformative school leadership for principals, professional development for our principals. It cannot fund, again, items that are already funded. This is a supplanting identification. And then the other piece with Title II is that districts are required to also have a Fund 1 set aside for professional development. So this is an enhancement, and so we have through the CDD significantly have increased our professional development allocation. I think roughly 800,000 just for equity and literacy support alone. So changes, what we see as a decrease in allocation due to enrollment. I mean, that'll be the ongoing theme. We've put some additional dollars for PD for K-2 literacy. We did do a reduction in extended time, but that's roughly $750,000 for extended time. You're going to see a decrease in non-public allocation. We are required to provide a certain percentage of our allocations in our title budgets to non-publics. So as we decrease enrollment, that means, and our title awards decrease, that just means a decrease in our non-public allocation as well. And as I mentioned, just to swap, we had a teacher equity plan identified. That's actually in our integration budget. It was approved, and we actually swapped that with the special education licensure initiative that Executive, or as a Senior Officer Sullivan could mention, but we have our special education licensure initiative there too, trying to increase the number of special education teachers in our district. Great. Title III is associated with our English language learners. And so it helps to ensure that our English language learners attain proficiency in English, develop high-level academic achievement in English. And so these are dollars primarily used for professional development, for teacher support. There is some dollars for curriculum writing and also family engagement to enhance our family engagement. So a list of what it can fund, but primarily activities that increase the proficiency of our ELL students. Again, mentioned family involvement, professional development aligned to our ELL teachers supporting curriculum writing. But again, the goal is to increase academic achievement. Again, that's an ongoing theme with all the title budgets. So minimum changes, decrease in non-public allocations, decrease in extended time that reflect the decline in enrollment. This is actually a positive thing. I will say that as we're presenting minimum changes, hopefully what you're seeing is ongoing commitment and plan to doing the good work that we've identified, allowing the strategies to be implemented with fidelity. And so Title III is very minimal changes here. All right, AYP funding. Essentially, AYP is our school improvement grant. And so we use these dollars to, again, increase academic achievement, but also to, we try to target our work with our AYP funding on schools that are identified in our Minnesota North Star system, identify schools for support. And again, the new state asset system is a system of support. It isn't a punitive system. It does identify schools that need additional support, and these funds are for school improvement specialists that actually work in the buildings at the instructional leadership team level, making sure that our school improvement plans are aligned to strategies that are aligned to budget. And so we have positions identified for that. And so, I mean, clearly you see that we use these dollars for our DPFs. We also use a portion of these funds for equity coordinators. We're required to do some evaluation of that grant. So there's a small amount identified there. And then contracts for professional development for the school improvement team. But this is one of the grants is very narrow in terms of what we're able to spend our dollars on. State directs us pretty clearly to focus on school improvement. So a small decrease for non-salary. We've increased a bit in our indirect, but we're going to continue our current structure of support for schools. And then finally, Title IV. This is a fairly new allocation. I think we're on year 3 of this allocation. But the purpose is really focusing on well-rounded education. Again, this was a focus of our comprehensive district design. Improve school conditions for student learning. So this is a grant that can support culture and climate. And they also, part of a well-rounded education is improve the use of technology, digital literacy for all students. So you see the broad areas here: well-rounded education, professional development, well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, right? School mental health, drug and violence prevention. It's a pretty broad grant. What they do indicate is that no more than 15% could be spent on technology infrastructure. We actually use our allocation to support technology integration. So we have a couple positions, for example, in this budget to support integration of technology best practices into our core content. So a small decrease in allocations, changes in allocations. We had carry forward last year. So the decreases reflect primarily the carry forward, but we had dollars identified for instrument repair. We reallocated those dollars to our Fund 1 aligned to the CDD. We had a one-time allocation of Bethune, Franklin, and North to support their music program. We transferred that cost to either our magnet programming or additional allocations within the CDD. We reduced our PD allocation, professional development, for restorative practices. Those dollars have been reallocated to our equity professional development line, again in the CDD. We did a purchase forward for anti-bias materials for what we call the AMAZE curriculum, which is the anti-bias curriculum in our elementary schools. We've reduced that slightly, but that we did a purchase forward this year. So we bought significant numbers of materials last year and the previous last year. We've also moved, we had a right center allocation, and we moved that actually to our integration budget, and that's per MDE. And then we increased our indirect. So our indirect increased per the state. So those are the integration budgets and title budgets. And so at this point, I'm happy to take questions just on the general purpose of the different budgets or any of the reallocations. I'm happy to take questions at this time. And my understanding is you'll receive the budgets, the actual budgets, along with the school by school allocations as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Senior Officer Moore. I appreciate you. Director N, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a few. First, one sort of general question in terms of presentation and as a board member making budget decisions, information that would be useful to me. I'd be interested to see some kind of general analysis of the correlation between and potentially causation of additional dollars and school improvement. So, we get the school improvement grants. To what extent do they actually do the things that they're supposed to do? If we look at the schools that have received those school improvement grants, what have we done with them, and has it made an impact? I'd like to see some kind of general analysis of that. The Title II dollars, with respect to the special ed licensure increases, is that the residency program? Is that related to the residency program and the Grow Your Own program? I guess I'm not sure. Like, I'd want some clarification. Can't supplant state dollars, right, with title money. So is this federal funding support the Grow Your Own program, or is it like an addition? Can we use it for that? Or maybe it's completely unrelated, different thing altogether. I don't know. And then the adjustment of the integration budget away from the Black Male Student Achievement Office, some of the Indian Ed programs, is that the state giving us feedback on that, and so we have to make those adjustments, or is it our own interpretation and we're making those adjustments ourselves? So those are a few questions that I have.
Thank you, Chair, or I'm sorry, Director Enns. Superintendent?
No more. I'm not.
Yeah, thanks, Director Enns, for the question. So I'll start with the integration one and then ask Senior Officer Moore to speak to the question about the analysis as well as the specific licensure increase. But you may recall a couple of years ago, we had several conversations around our achievement integration and how we needed to change things over. And it was really a very targeted conversations from the Minnesota Department of Education about how we're using those achievement integration dollars.
Yeah, I explicitly remember those conversations.
Yep. So it wasn't so much our interpretation of it as it was their clear direction around this is the expectation. And so I think we've been trying to intentionally and deliberately make those transitions to being very clear in our utilization of those dollars. And so I think the example that Senior Officer Moore gave was an exact direction that we had to go based on the feedback from the state.
In a general sense, then, I wonder about things like the magnets programs that don't create that, previously, like our magnet schools that were creating more segregation, while not explicitly targeted to those, towards segregation, the result was segregation. Those things don't apply in the same way, I would assume, or I don't know. Could you comment on that too briefly?
Yeah, well, what I will say, and then I'll ask Executive or Senior Officer Moore to elaborate a little bit more on that. Those plans that we put forward to the state are reviewed by the state. And so when we put our achievement integration plan forward, it was a continuation of a couple of years. And so I think part of the I guess, assumption that people would make is that it will work, or after 1 year, they're saying it doesn't work and it actually leads to this. So that's where we have to come back and modify it, using the actual data to make those adjustments. So we certainly start with the intent of, to your point, the magnet schools, to make sure that we integrate them. And then if that is not working, have to take a look at what's contributing to that and have to make adjustments with it. But it's not a direct conversation that I think we've had. It's more of a looking at our plan and adjusting it based on, the outcomes and results.
Yeah, and I think that's we've had those lengthy discussions in the past, and we've seen data with regard to those integration programs specifically. A couple of years ago when we did the budget, we did see that detailed stuff, and I remember Director Walzer was really wanted to see a paragraph about what each thing was for, and a narrative. And so I find that stuff's pretty helpful to include. So anyway.
Senior Officer Moore, did you want to respond to the two other points around the special licensure increases, as well as the the analysis for those dollars around any kind of school improvement plans? Or
yeah, I mean, I can start first with the magnet schools. I mean, I think what's interesting, if you think about what the funds are asking us to do to increase racial and economic integration, we actually are through the work of our CDD and centralizing the magnets is really allowing us to address the issues of racially identifiable schools. So racially identifiable schools are schools that are 20% or more the district average of your student of color population. So that's how the state identifies a school as being a segregated school or racially identifiable school. For years, Director Enns, as you mentioned, we were spending money on our magnet schools and not reducing the number of racially identifiable schools. And so through the boundary change and by centralizing the magnets, we're expecting to, waiting to take a look at enrollment numbers, but our long-term plan was actually to reduce the number of racially identifiable schools by 60%, and also reduce the number of schools that are 80% or more free and reduced lunch by 60%. And we're pretty close. I don't want to jinx it yet. I want to look at the enrollment numbers, but through the boundary change and centralizing the magnets, we are actually meeting the intent of the integration plan. That's always been the intent all along. We did not see a reduction in our racially identifiable schools. And then I think the results were, to your point, mixed because of the location of our magnets previously. We weren't getting, in some cases, increases or even increases in integrated learning opportunities, some of our magnets. In fact, some of our magnets were actually more segregated because of where they were located. And so we've been able to address that issue, both of reducing the number of racially identifiable schools and also having increased integrated learning opportunities through the decisions made in the CDD.
So Officer Moore, so I appreciate that. I guess my question was getting more at an example would be the school improvement grants.
Yeah.
For example, like I remember 5 years ago, Green Central got a school improvement grant, and then a year or two later, we saw a lot of increase in academic achievement there, right? And I think a big part of that was they got additional funding, and so they had smaller class sizes, more programming. I mean, it had a big impact on the culture at the school as well. A lot of great things happened, and I think there was a direct correlation. So I'd be interested to see some sort of study or analysis of like a school that, all things being equal, maybe, gets an increase in funding. What's the correlation to an increase in academic achievement, right? Just like a really clear analysis like that would be, I think, really helpful. And sometimes in making our case about increased school funding politically as well. So.
Yeah, I appreciate Director Enns. I think, it's certainly not causal, because I think that the tension in looking at the relationship between resource allocations and schools is that there's another number of other variables. So first, those dollars, those significant grants are capacity building grants. And one of the challenges when you receive a grant is if you hire a lot of staff, certainly that's not sustainable. And I think as we're going through the CDD process, they're estimating that it's going to cost another $800,000 to $1 million per school if you're above 80% free and reduced lunch. So that's just the goal in order to get that level of growth. In many cases, aligned to the grants. But certainly the other variables in the equation are strong principals. We find that principals who have been in the location for multiple years make a difference. Those principals that have been in a location where they can establish a strong culture. Going back to the Ayp grant, the school improvement. So those schools that have strong instructional leadership teams, they empower their teachers, so strong teacher leaders. They're then looking at their data, they're looking at the information in the professional learning community, grade level teams. So those are also considerations. And then when you have, so I would say if you have a strong plan, strong leadership, a positive culture, a culture of collaboration, and you have resources, then you're able to see the movement. But I certainly wouldn't say there's a direct relationship between money and academic achievement, although it certainly helps if you have a strong plan and a strong leader. Certainly we can run a study and take a look at that, but it's extremely complex. I'll just share that with you.
I appreciate your quick analysis, but
I've been thinking about it for years.
Yeah. I mean,
Just keep it up at night.
Sorry,
this is a great conversation.
I appreciate it, but I would like to see some.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Great dialogue. I appreciate the conversation. Just one comment from me. I appreciate the slides telling folks what they can and cannot use funding for. I don't believe I've ever seen that in any presentation at MPS with the finance department. So I appreciate really making it very clear what we can and cannot do with those dollars. So if there's no more questions, I'm ready to move on to the last item for the evening. So we have this evening 2 capital fund transfers. I'll now take a motion to forward these 2 items together to the full board with the committee's recommendation, and then we can take any questions. Did I skip something? I don't think so. No, I did not.
Well,
Can I get a motion to transfer the capital transfer
Move
to the full board? Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Inns.
Excellent. Thank you. Those capital fund transfers will be moved and seconded. Senior Officer Giap, would you like to comment on these items?
yes, Chair Caprini, members of the committee. This is, I think, the second or third one so far. And what causes this is that, or the reason for these transfers is that at the beginning, maybe a year or two, when we would have a project and we would cost it at a certain level, sometimes the cost of building may go down in terms of materials or anything. So there may be a decrease in cost. Rather than going out and selling another bond and adding to the debt service, we are looking at the projects that have remaining dollars, making sure that the original project has been completed according to codes and all that, and then taking the remaining dollars and reallocating them to other areas of the district that are in need of repair or improvement. So these transfers are are following that logic. And in the future, we may have one or two coming. That would be the reason why we would do it. We would do these transfers, working hand in hand with the facilities department. I work with my colleague, Senior Officer DeVet, on a regular basis to get ready for these transfers and bring it to your attention. So that's all I had for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Officer Giap. So those capital fund transfers were in our packet, and we will be able to have a further discussion since we are moving that onto the board. If the directors, do you have any questions? Seeing none, Ryan, will you please take the roll?
Inns,
Yes.
Jordan,
yes.
Ellison,
Aye.
Caprini.
Aye. Thank you, finance team and committee members. I will now take a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
All right, it's been moved and seconded to adjourn this meeting. Ryan, will you please take the roll?
Inns,
Yes.
Jordan,
yes.
Ellison,
Yes.
Caprini.
Aye. Thank you. That motion carries, and we are adjourned. Our next Finance Committee meeting will be March 16th. See y'all later.